Hello everyone. Good evening and good morning to all. This is IRSG's second webinar series on green financing opportunities for the rubber value chain. We have to be able to think of climate action not as a drag on the economics, but as a booster. Transformation to low carbon to climate resilience is actually a good investment for a sustainable growth. The transition to a sustainable low-carbon economy requires adequate availability of financial capital. Are companies prepared for the risk associated with climate action? How can these companies access finance for their initiatives? Many banks have adopted risk management framework to guide their lending and investment decisions. Today, we have two guest speakers to address this topic on green financing. Both of them are IRSG members. The first guest speaker is Yulanda Ho Yang Chung, Head of Sustainability Institutional Banking Group DBS. And our second guest speaker is Ritchie Li, Head of Diversified Industrials Group Wholesale Banking UOB. And myself, Lekshmi Nair, Head of Economics and Statistics, the moderator for this today's webinar. Few housekeeping suggestions. Participants are in listen-only mode, and you can type the questions in the Q&A area. First, I welcome Yulanda to speak on how rubber industry can tap into green finance. Yulanda, please.
Thank you, Lekshmi, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak to all the members. Let me share my screen so that you can all see my presentation. So you should be able to see the beginning of the deck. Let me start by talking about DBS' overall approach to sustainability. As a bank, we recognize our core competence as a financial institution has a lot to offer to be a good corporate citizen and also in contributing to the different sustainable development goals. We look at sustainability and try to define it in 3 areas. So we call them sustainability pillars. The first one, where the bulk of my work is on responsible financing, green and social finance. When it comes to responsible finance, this is about capital allocation to make sure that we do the environmental, social governance risk assessments correctly, to be able to identify those risks, mitigate those risks, and also to define certain no-go areas that the bank would not go into. In the area of green and social finance, which is really the subject of what my presentation is about today, is to say for different industry segments and today about the rubber industry, how you can tap into green finance and how green finance is not just for large corporates and not just for renewables. It cuts across industry segments, it cuts across large corporates and also SMEs. And I'll give you some examples. The second pillar that we look at sustainability is how we manage our own shop. We are the only Singaporean company which have signed up to a commitment called RE100. You can see that under the category managing our environmental footprint. So RE100 is a commitment that a company can make to commit to sourcing 100% of our electricity consumption from renewable sources. So we've been able to do that by increasing the energy efficiency of all our branches and offices and data centers, and also making use on the limited space that we have to have on-site solar PV generation. We've also been able to achieve that commitment by buying the renewable energy certificates, the so-called RECs, and with a preference to what is generated in RCN. We also want to make sure that our own supply chain at DBS, in our sourcing, in our procurement, is also sustainable. And we try to look at circular economy, how we can close the loop in a lot of the industries that we work with. So one example here is that the mainframe and also a lot of the laptop computers that we buy from IBM, now the delivery of those products come in bulk without packaging, so as to minimize the packaging. And also the circular route is that we recycle as much of the material by going back to the original producer as possible. In being an employer of choice, in the middle pillar, we at DBS have been very proud as a good advocate of gender diversity, and also to be able to have a lot of more than 1/3 of our senior management as women. On to the third pillar about creating social impact. Our DBS Foundation is known in Singapore and also in ASEAN as the premier grant program in supporting social enterprises. We also marry that with our own employee volunteering schemes to make sure that we do skills-based volunteering to support social enterprises. So it's not just through grant, but it's also through mentoring and other type of support, including having a dedicated financing package for social enterprises. Then on to the meat of my presentation today, to the Association on Sustainable Finance. When it comes to the rubber industry, at DBS, as a long-standing development bank of Singapore, having that root in the bank's genesis, we have been involved in financing the rubber industry for many years. And we see that with the advent and the advance of technology that we have in the market, we have been able to help clients across the value chain to make use of those technology, to make sure that they cater to increasing demands from their buyers and the eventual customers of our buyers, for example, the car tires. One example here that we have been able to do for our clients is the sustainable rubber supply chain finance, and in establishing traceability in particular. We have been able to scout the market, identify the right vendors with the right software in the right geography to help smallholders in the rubber industry for data capture and access to the smallholders. As we know, smallholders play a very big role in the value chain. We have been able to also establishing traceability in the supply chain, and together with the data capture that we have been able to establish with the vendors and with clients, we are able to incentivize the smallholders to adopt sustainable farming behavior. The processing itself is also going to be sustainable if we tap into the factory floor to make sure that the processing itself is water efficient, energy efficient. And that would go a long way to attracting the buyers, and the buyers themselves are able to claim that their car tires are made with natural rubber coming from a credible and sustainable source. The incentive in the supply chain finance here is that we are looking to do in the rubber supply chain in the same way that we have done with other supply chain that we have already effected, in the sense that if we can already make use of technology and different platforms to identify farmers and also to be able to track whether their farming practices are sustainable, we are able to incentivize smallholders at a very granular level to be able to say, if, say, a processing plant is able to source their natural rubber from a sustainable source, how do we incentivize them by lowering the margin in the financing for those processing plants? And we do that hopefully with a lot of the buyers, the end buyers in the value chain, because the buyers will be able to establish a credible supply chain, even though they themselves would not be benefiting from the margin reduction in the financing. Here, what I would like to show is a real case study of what we've been able to do to help customers access to smallholders. by giving farmers nowadays a very cheaply produced but very usable and reliable smartphone to do data capture. We are able to identify the farmers, to enter simple details to establish the profile, and not just the profile of the farmers, but profile of the plot, to monitor farm activity and the yield, and all that would come into a smart farm database. And with that platform, we're able to track whether farmers are adopting the practices that the end buyers or the processing plants require of them, and incentivize them through the financing package and other concessionary terms. Here on this slide, what I would like to show is two case studies that we have done with the agri-commodities and the rubber player. With the agri-commodities company AgroCorp, we have effected the first to market blockchain-based electronic platform to be able to digitally map the entire process for the commodities transactions. So the first pilot transaction I remember was to do with mung beans grown in Australia but being bought by a buyer in China. And the buyer is able to establish every step of the way where the mung beans are, and that the mung beans are indeed sourced from the farm that is adopting sustainable farming practices. All the parties on the supply chain can access that information real time, and not just on sustainability information, but also on commodity prices and delivery information. And that transparency and traceability is now really valued by a lot of other agri-commodities companies. The second case study is something that is in the rubber industry, and many of you would have read and heard about it. DBS has invested in an electronic trading platform together with Haoxiong to develop Havia Connect. This marketplace is the trading of sustainably processed natural rubber, and the platform now is also extended to trade regular processed natural rubber. With our investment, we hope that we can enable a one-stop platform to track pricing, and also to be able to enhance the credibility when buyers are buying from a sustainable source, and to hope that in the near future we'll be able to establish a premium for sustainably processed natural rubber. And together we want to serve our clients at DBS not just as a bank anymore. I think a lot of the sustainable finance transactions that we have been doing with our customers has been an ecosystem solution, meaning that we become the one place clients come to with their challenges, and we try to work them out together, including by scouting in the market for the right partners involved in the transaction. Something that we've done since we have made a very concerted effort in green finance. There are two types of loan, two types of credit facilities that you have heard and sometimes used interchangeably, when in fact they refer to two different things. One is the green loan. Green loan is a loan that the entirety of the loan has to go to earmark green projects, green assets. And this type of loans has been very popular, especially with the real estate industry, because especially in Singapore, there is a very well-established rating system to rate green buildings. So we've seen a lot of real estate companies tapping into green loans, and the entirety of the loan would go to finance a new build or to refinance an existing building, or it could be a building that is up for retrofit, and the loan proceeds will be used to finance the upgrade. On the other side is what we call the ESG linked loan, sometimes called sustainability improvement linked loans. Now, this type of facility is very different from green loans, even though sometimes it could be confused with green loans because it's all very sustainable, it's under the same umbrella. But ESG linked loans refer to the type of loan that actually there is no restrictions on the user proceeds. There is no restriction on how the borrower used the money. They can use it for working capital, they can use it for green or even non-green, or as in non-brown, but also neutral economic activities. And this type of loan has been very popular because it presents a potential upside to our borrowers that they can enjoy a margin reduction if they meet predetermined sustainability performance targets. We've been able to do these loans to customers to lend them in sectors from agri-commodities to SMEs to companies in the energy sector, real estate, and also the pure green renewable energy company. So with this type of loan, with the flexibility offered in the use of proceeds, we are hoping that in the coming year, we can help a lot more SMEs in particular to be able to tap ESG-linked financing. Here is a track record of what DBS has done on green loans. As I've said, it has been very popular with real estate companies, and we see that this could be replicated with some agri-commodities companies, because when it comes to plantation, there are certain certifications that we can use to demonstrate the definition of green in your operations. Next, on this slide, you will see select examples of what we've done in sustainability-linked loans. One thing I want to emphasize is that with sustainability-linked loans or ESG-linked loans, we've been able to do that with clients from a variety of sectors. And this could also apply to the rubber industry. You can see that we have done that with many of the agri-commodities companies, from COFCO to Louis Dreyfus to Wilmar to Olam. And we have also been able to do that with SMEs, Choose Agriculture, which is an egg producer. And it is an interesting case study that I would present later on. So the first case study is with Louis Dreyfus, is a sustainability-linked loan. This is a loan that we acted as a sustainability advisor for the syndicated financing. And the syndication, in fact, was really welcomed in the market. We've got 26 banks in the end participating in the transaction. In fact, the size of the facility was increased from the original 500 million to 650 million because of the massive interest that we've received. With Louis Dreyfus is a sustainability-linked loans, meaning that in the beginning, we sat down with the customer to look at what would be the material sustainability performance indicators that they can use as benchmark, as the targets. And in their case, the focus is really on greenhouse gas emissions and waste, to reduce waste to landfill, and also to reduce effluent discharge and also energy use. With all the material factors included in the benchmark, we will be working with Louis Dreyfus to see whether they will meet the targets and to be able to enjoy the margin reduction that I mentioned as the potential upside in such credit facility. The second case study I mentioned is an SME. It is a very interesting one. In fact, you will see in the picture on the slide is one of the all-time favorite pictures that we have been showing to customers and always generate a bit of a giggle. You will see that there is a DBS logo amongst the layer hens in the chicken farm. So it is with Choose Agriculture. It's an egg producer based in Singapore. The loan is relatively small. It's 27 million. It's a sustainability-linked loan, and it's the first ever for an SME in the region. The target that we have set for the borrower is something called the Humane Farm Animal Care Certification, meaning that the layer hens will be housed in an accommodation that is, while it is not entirely free range, but it is not a battery farm environment. And it is cage-free, and the layer hens are given the right nutrition, the right environment to thrive. The egg producer will be eligible for an interest rate reduction when it achieves the Human Farm Animal Care certification. So this is a case study that for us, it is a trailblazer in that we have been able to serve SMEs with a sustainability-linked loans, and there is really no minimum quantum of financing that is required. And the target that we set for customers could be really pertinent to your industry. So in the rubber industry's case, we can looking at traceability. We can look at the farming practices of smallholders. We can look at the processing plants operations. So there are many different ways that we can benchmark the targets. Next, apart from loans, we've also seen parallels in the bond market, especially with the sustainability themed bonds. So there are green bonds. So here it is similar to the green loans. There are restrictions to the use of proceeds. The entirety of the money raised in the bond would have to go to identified predetermined green projects and assets. So as a result, you can see that with green bonds and also social bonds, is applicable to industries that is relatively easy to identify green assets, whether it is renewables, real estate, or financial institutions in particular. But in emergence, there are now different labels that are equally credible, and customers are increasingly interested in looking at, especially the second box, sustainability linked bond. So this particular type of bond, we've seen only one case in the market so far. The proceeds from the bond can be used for general corporate purposes. However, the coupon payment is linked to sustainability indicators. And it is, as a result, very similar to the sustainability linked loan, that it can be applicable to a variety of issuers from a wide range of industry sectors. The reason that we've seen the emergence of sustainability linked bonds is that with green bonds and social bonds, companies may have funding needs that are far greater than what they can identify as their green assets. So they are not able to issue just the green bond because their funding needs are far greater. And with sustainability linked bond, with no restriction on the use of proceeds, it has been able to attract quite a lot of interest. And we see that after the precedent set by the one company, which is NL, an Italian utility, we are seeing a lot of interest from potential issuers. The other label that again is gaining a bit of traction, and we see that the market is warming to such a label, is called the transition bond. Here, it is relatively, there is no black and white consensus as to what economic activities we consider transition, because the use of proceeds, there will be a restriction to go to identified economic activities that would help the companies transition to a low carbon economy. And transition bonds, again, is beginning to get traction because a lot of the customers in this part of the world, where ASEAN is at our economic development, a lot of the economic activities will still be considered transitional rather than dark green. And as a result, this particular label will allow issuers to avoid any accusations about trying to issue a green bond when the assets themselves may not be legitimately considered green. So rather than skirting on the border of being green, this label allows issuers to be upfront about the underlying assets of the bond. Here you will see a track record of what we have done in the area of green bonds and social bonds. And we hope that we'll be able to do more in more industry sectors, especially in the agri and the plantation sector. I think it is sometimes misunderstood that companies involved in plantation, forestry, or timber-related industries will not be able to tap into green finance, when in fact there are many very transparent and achievable criteria when it comes to plantation forestry, say a rubber plantation, that there are straightforward criteria you can meet and be able to label your bond or loan green. And the slide I'm showing here is the criteria shown under the climate bond certification, which is a very well regarded certification scheme that is well received by investors and also by banks. And you will see that under plantation forestry and also sustainable forest management and non-timber forest products, you would see that there are many different ways that you can identify your concessions or areas of economic activities in your operations that will be considered either mitigation meaning to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions arising from your operations, to increasing climate resilience, meaning that you're adapting your operations to a world that is going to be resource constrained and there will be more demands for low carbon operations. The final row called FPIC component refers to free, prior and informed consent. And this one, it is often adopted to make sure that the smallholders involved and also the concessions involved have got legitimate access to the use of land. And with that, I would stop here and would welcome any questions from the participants.
Let's see, we have questions coming from participants to your topic. As I have not seen questions coming in, I move to the next speaker. I invite Mr. Ritchie Li to speak on opportunities and risks for companies for going green. Mr. Ritchie, please.
Thank you, Lekshmi. Okay, let me get my screen started. Okay, Lekshmi, do you see my screen up already?
Yes.
Ah, great. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us on this webinar. So just a brief background, UOB is essentially a Singapore-based bank with presence in 19 countries and with offices in more than seven locations. I'm actually part of this group called the Sector Solutions Group. So in the Sector Solutions Group, we divide ourselves into industries so that we can focus and give deep insights into various sectors such as industrials, consumer goods, construction infrastructure. And our work, we tie very closely with the sectorial coverage teams in the various countries. So we do have local presence and local knowledge of the ground as well. And our product suites covers across the whole range available within the bank, such as corporate banking and cash management as well. Okay, and going straight into the presentation itself, the sharing, essentially we are going to talk about what we view as sustainability within the rubber sector. And then after we'll move on to the why of it. And more importantly, what are the parallels that we see from the other industries that can be adapted into the rubber industry. Then after we'll move on to the when, as in when should we be acting. I think it's quite clear that all industries are already embarking on the process of ESG journey. But the question is, are we reacting or are we taking a proactive approach to it? Then next will be who are the parties involved in this ESG journey? And obviously, banks as a financial institution is one of the stakeholders that want to play a very key role in this journey together. And of course, the how is how do the banks actually come in to help drive sustainability within the rubber industry as well as a partner. All right, so in terms of the typical ESG factors that we see in the rubber value chain, we are really concerned about what's a material factor within the industry that we want to take care of, right? Because there's no point doing all the small immaterial things and it doesn't really drive value for everybody, right? So, I mean, the upstream is really about the smallholders, about the use of chemicals. And interestingly, the use of chemicals do have a lead-on impact into the midstream as well, because if you use the wrong chemicals in upstream, it will affect your production quality in the midstream and ultimately to your downstream as well, right? And then when we move on to the mid and downstream, some of the key overlapping factors that we see is actually in terms of like clean energy, in terms of the contribution of whether you are using efficient use of energy so that you can cut down on your emissions, your water discharge, whether are you discharging irresponsibly into common rivers and all that, right? And then in terms of workers, it's really about your worker conditions, your worker rights. And like what Yulanda was mentioning earlier, traceability, is it something that the downstream is able to have a hold on so that we can have true visibility over the end-to-end supply chain? All right, and then next, we looked at the top sectors with ESG risks. And what we noticed is that in the top 10 sectors, 6 of them are actually commodity related, because all these have a very visible and direct impact on the land, the water use, as well as worker welfare as well. So the purpose of showcasing these top 10 sectors is really to see, is there an underlying theme that we can see across this and actually learn something from it in parallel. Okay, so the 3 sectors that we sort of try to learn something from is really in palm oil, because in palm oil, we really see a lot of compliance costs, a lot of certifications that's ongoing in terms of, like, for example, your RSPO and all that. And then after that, when we look at another sector, coal mining, in coal mining sector, it has seen a lot of attention because there are a lot of news about banks pulling out from financing coal mining or coal-fired power plants, right? And then after that, when we move on to another sector, we see the oil and gas and chemical space. We see that they have rising operational costs because they have to have a high standard of safety. If something goes wrong, then they have to spend a lot of cost to remedy those kind of, for example, oil spillages and all that. So at the end of the day, what are we learning from all these different sectors is that we see that from a relative point of view, rubber is actually on a very proactive stage of things, whereas the other 3 might be, I would say, a bit more reactive currently, because it's been they have been under a lot of scrutiny, and now they are basically responding to whatever comes next. Whereas for rubber, we still have the advantage of being very proactive and having market leadership on how we can pursue this kind of ESG solutioning and all that. Okay, and some of the key initiatives within the rubber space that we see is, like, for example, the Sustainable Natural Rubber Initiative, the Global Platform for Sustainable Natural Rubber. So all these are voluntary industry-led kind of initiatives, right? So we see this as a very proactive approach that rubber industry is enjoying currently. Okay, and then when we look down into the stakeholders within the industry, right, we see that, I mean, end consumers are all demanding for more ESG responsible purchases. The rubber industry players, the manufacturers, they are also recognizing that they do need to be an active partner with this ESG journey. I mean, we see the NGOs, the governments all coming in together as partners to see how we can encourage the rubber sector to be more sustainable. And then, of course, most importantly, I think what everybody really wants to know is, so as banks and investors, what are we, how are we contributing to this journey? And are we just taking a proactive or reactive approach to things as well, right? So, I mean, as what Yulanda was also sharing, similar UOB, we are taking a very proactive approach to sustainable financing as well. So just share a bit of background of sustainable financing. I mean, the key drive really started when the UN came out with the Sustainable Development Goals, where everybody had a proper framework to run our ideas around, right? So we are not just doing things for the sake of doing, we are not just trying our luck, we are really doing something that has a framework in place that's acceptable for everybody, right? So when we talk about financing, the original focus in the early days was really about green bonds, about green loans, but all these were tied to very specific use of proceeds, right? Whereas because it's so specific, the use case was very limited. And what we are seeing now in the industry is we really see a lot of innovative ways to support sustainable or green financing. And this is through the introduction of what we call sustainable linked products. And what's so innovative about this is all these are really tied to KPIs or performance measures that's not tied to a very specific use of proceeds. Okay, so when we move down to the types of sustainable financing, on the left, sustainable linked loans, these are where we are tied to our efforts and not just the use of proceeds, right? Whereas the green loans and green sustainable bonds, all these are tied to a very specific use of proceeds. And the only difference between the loans and the bonds is really how it is distributed in the capital markets. Okay, and then when we go specific into UOB and how we like to approach this, is that we actually have 3 main umbrella frameworks for us to bucket how we want to do our sustainable financing. And these frameworks are very important because with frameworks, you can cut across a lot of the unknowns. And when you find a use case that fits into the umbrella, you can just run ahead and have this as a to fulfill your ESG requirements, right? So we go a bit detailed. So in terms of like green building financing, this is, while it may seem very real estate centric, it cuts across asset classes as well. So your industrial, your factories, all these are possible to become green buildings as well, right? And then we look in the middle, in terms of green infrastructure, this ties in primarily to your renewable energy, your your waste to energy, your water management possibilities as well. All right. And then lastly is in terms of your circular economy, how we can actually tie in with the renew, reuse, and reduce, the 3 R's of the economy. Okay, and in UOB, we not only have a team covering natural rubber, we also have a sustainable finance team as well. So if there's any questions or any potential use cases that you all see and you all wish to bounce your ideas through us, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Yep, so that will be the end of the presentation. Lekshmi, is there any Q&A?
Thank you very much, Ritchie, for your presentation. We will look into the Q&As. Anybody has posted questions from both of your area? We have not yet seen any question. Participants, please raise the questions through the Q&A area to address any of the topic of the guest speakers today. Okay, I can find one question coming in now. Yes, Ritchie, you would like to answer the question, how is due diligence done for SMEs?
Yeah, thanks for the first question. So in terms of due diligence, I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how green financing is, there will always be a need for the typical credit assessment as well. So once we clear the credit hurdle, then we'll look at the green hurdle in terms of what kind of financing are we doing for the SMEs? Are we doing a sustainable linked loan where we are tying it to a particular KPI, where we then have to establish what are the benchmark numbers that we are trying to improve on? Then followed by, if it is a green loan, then of course, then we have to tie into what's the underlying purpose, what's the use of proceeds that we are looking for, and is there any way that we can ensure that those use of proceeds are used specifically for the stated purpose?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and allow me to answer the question about how do the finance costs or the interest rate for green loans compare to standard rates. So At the moment, there is no pricing advantage for the borrowers when it comes to doing the green loans, but for the sustainability-linked loans, there is the potential for margin reduction. But for green loans, the one that comes with restrictions on the use of proceeds, how you use the loan, there is no differential in the pricing. However, we have seen that a lot of the customers will still try to do a green loan, partly for marketing, but partly also to communicate to their stakeholders, whether it is to their buyers, to their customers, or to their shareholders, that they are moving on in this ESG journey. So we do see that there's a difference in between doing PR and doing communication, and customers really value to be able to tell their story, because otherwise not many people would actually buckle down to read companies' annual report or sustainability report in detail.
We have one more question already posted. What type of activities are related to sustainability in rubber farming? Yulanda, would you like to? Yeah.
Sure. So first, let me tackle the social dimension. As we know, smallholders are particularly important to the supply chain in rubber production, and how smallholders are treated, the fair working labor, working conditions, the wage level, and also in terms of the access to land, all those questions would have to be answered. In terms of the farming practices, we know that when it comes to the smallholders, this only become more material when it comes to replanting. Otherwise, if the plantation or if the trees are already up and producing, there is less concern when it comes to the sustainability criteria. Then on to the midstream when it comes to processing. Here there are ready environmental management certifications that sometimes companies can already lean on. With the processing, the environmental management criteria could be related to the energy and water use and also waste management.
Hi, Ritchie. Yes.
Yeah, okay, so for the next question, how long is the life cycle of green loans? Actually, the answer to this is, at the end of the day, the green loan must have an underlying, it must be tied to the cash flow of the underlying facility as well. Because as you know, when banks come in to finance, we are financing against a particular asset, against the cash flow of the asset. So it is very difficult to divorce the two different things, to say that credit and a green financing is two totally different things. Because at the end of the day, it must make credit sense, it must make commercial sense before a green loan can be put in place.
Okay, thank you. Any other question is coming in? No. Okay, thank you very much for both Yulanda and Ritchie for joining today's webinar. If any other questions to be addressed for any of this topic, attendees can directly write to the guest speakers. Certainly they will address the questions you are addressing. Once again, thank you very much for both the speakers for joining IRSG's webinar on green financing, addressing the value chain of the rubber economy. This is a topic addressed widely in various sustainability forum, and many of the financial institutions are now started addressing as one of a key stakeholder in this sustainability area. Thank you very much for both DBS and UOB. Both are members of IRSG, and thank you very much for both speakers for joining today in IRSG's webinar.